Reference mixes. What are they? How do we use them? What makes a good reference mix? How to avoid the pitfalls of using reference mixes, and there are some. And even some little explored reference mix techniques to help you get better mixes in your home studio. I'm Keith from No Label, No Producer, No Limits.com. Let's dive right in. What is a reference mix? Well, a reference mix is a good sounding recording, usually professionally produced, that we use to gain perspective on our recordings. Now, what does that mean, gain perspective? Well, it's easy to get lost in the details, to lose your focus on your own recording. And so what you can do is use a reference mix to get you back to sort of reset your perspective, to reset your ears to this is what sounds good. Now, it's important to know, and I think this is a broad concept that you can use, is that you don't want to try to copy your reference mix. What you want to do is match perhaps the feel, the impact, some of the tones, some of the sounds, but you'll get into trouble if you try to duplicate exactly what's going on in your reference mix. The idea is you listen to the song, the reference mix, and you like the way it sounds, and you keep working on your song until you feel it's the same quality or as close to that quality as you can get. Recording and mixing are games of perspective, and we can use those who have gone before us and created songs that we like, productions that we like, in order to tell us whether we're in the ballpark or not of what we want to achieve. When do we use reference mixes? Well, certainly at least an hour or two when you're breaking in new monitors, new headphones, or a new listening environment, if you have the time. And I also like to listen to a good song or two before I start a session or when I come back from a break from a session. So all throughout the recording process, but especially you use them during mixing and mastering. Now, the point of using reference mixes, again, is to reset your perspective. So when you're starting a session, if you put on a cool song and listen to just a minute or two, that tells your ears, this is what's good, this is the quality that we're shooting for. In a mix-down process or in mastering, you're probably listening more critically and listening to overall tonal balance, you're listening to individual instruments, you're listening to the relationship between those instruments, you're listening to the amount of movement and depth, you're listening to all aspects. And so it's a more intensive and time-intensive process when you're in the mastering or mixing phases. I use reference mixes quite a bit more in those phases than any other phases. In terms of the recording process, I just use them to reset my ears when I'm starting out or coming back from a break. One way to use reference mixes is just a very broad sense. How good does your song sound? How good does your mix sound compared to a reference mix? If you listen to the two and you think, wow, that one is really good and this one is really bad, well, then you've got some more work to do. A second area you can use reference mixes in is general tonal balance. Does your mix sound harsh or muddy compared to the reference mix? Well, then you might have something to fix. I'd advise in this case to use several different reference mixes because not every professionally sounding recording has exactly the same EQ curve, of course. So we want to just get a general sense, are we in a reasonable range in terms of overall tone? One way to use reference mixes is to compare instruments to each other. For instance, if you're mixing drums and listening to a hi-hat, it's really easy to focus on that and lose where that hi-hat should be in relationship to some of the other instruments. So you can pull in a reference mix to listen to where the hi-hat is compared to, say, the lead vocal or the snare drum. Listen to the level of sibilance in the voice compared to the high end in the cymbal crashes and gauge it that way. You can listen to the toms compared to the snare. You can listen to the toms compared to the guitar, the bass drum compared to the guitars, the vocal compared to the snare. All these things can give you ideas about where things sit in proportion to each other. And that can get your perspective back when you've been zoomed in too far on a particular instrument. Let's do just a little bit of critical listening here, just to give you a taste of the kinds of things that you can pay attention to when listening to reference mixes. You can use reference mixes to judge any sonic aspect of your mix. You can listen to the fade out on a reference mix and use that as a guideline. You can listen to the level of effects. You can listen to the level of the cymbals, the keyboards, the violins. Two of my favorite things to do with reference mixes are to listen to where a particular instrument or sound sits compared to the rest of the mix, and to listen to how a particular instrument or sound compares to other instruments or sounds in the mix. Let's start off by comparing the level of the vocal and the level of the snare with these two mixes. These are songs called Every Love Song and The Dream. Listen to the snare compared to the vocals.
Girl, you've got something about you, you know I can't resist. And when I look into your eyes, whoa. When I was just a boy, on nights like these, I looked to the stars for peace. Girl, you've got something about you, you know I can't resist. And when I look into your eyes, whoa.
That's pretty interesting. They're not far apart in terms of levels of snare and vocals. Now let's listen to where the hi-hat sits in the mix.
Girl, you've got something about you, you know I can't resist. And when I look into your eyes, whoa. I just melt and there's no doubt you've got the best of me. But there's one thing you should realize, whoa, can't you see? When I was just a boy, on nights like these, I looked to the stars for peace.
So that hi-hat comes through quite a bit when we go to the open and closed hi-hat. So that's that t-t-t-t-t-t-t. Let's listen to where the crash cymbals are. And once again, you can listen to these things in your reference mix, compare them to your mix, make some changes toward your reference mix, and see if it improves the mix. So let's listen to that little snare fill after the toms into a crash, and then the vocals. What are the relative levels of the snare, the crash, and the vocals?
When I was just a boy.
Now let's listen to something from Every Love Song, moving from a fill into a crash.
Girl, your lips. Girl, your lips.
That crash is quite a bit quieter. As long as we're here, let's listen. We have in both songs rhythm, what I call chunka-chunka guitars. They just hit along with the hi-hat on the eighth notes. Let's listen to the relative levels of those.
Girl, your lips, they are my heaven. And when we sweetly kiss, I know that you can feel it too. Whoa. When I was just a boy, on nights like these, I look to the stars for peace.
So you can get an idea there for if those guitars sit similarly in the mixes. Let's listen now to the bass guitar in the bridges.
Now the storm is brewing. I can feel it in the air. I'm coming home before too long, and I'm hoping you will be there. Hope you'll still be there. 'Cause when you're with me, it's alright. Romeo.
So it seems to me that the bass in the bridge of The Dream is a little bit more prominent than the bass in Every Love Song in the bridge. In The Dream, it's a much more sparse part, so perhaps that's part of the reason. But it also seems like it has a more solid bottom end there. So these are just a few of the things that you can listen to in terms of listening to a reference mix and comparing it to your own mix. You can use reference mixes to judge any sonic aspect of your mix. Let me ask you a question and answer honestly, please. Did you notice if one song or the other had more reverb on the vocals? We've been listening to these songs critically for quite a while now. If you didn't notice, let's take a look and see if you notice now. Here's The Dream.
When I was just a boy, on nights like these.
Here's Every Love Song.
Girl, you've got something about you. You know I can't resist. When I was just a boy, on nights like these, I look to the stars for peace. Girl, you've got something about you. You know I can't resist.
Every Love Song, that second piece there, the last piece we just listened to, has quite a bit less reverb than The Dream. Now, if you didn't notice, it's really a testament to the power of attention. When we turn our attention to things, obviously we notice them more. And this is one reason I like to go through several aspects of a reference mix and check them against my mix, in case there's something I'm not paying attention to. If you did notice, well, great, you've got some trained ears. You can also use reference mixes to judge individual instruments. You can have a reference mix that has, let's say, a bass guitar that you really like or a snare drum that you really like, and they can be different mixes. And you can use those to compare to your mix and to your song. But I'd advise you not to go too far down this road. It's a fool's errand to try to match your snare drum or your bass guitar to the snare drum or a bass guitar in another song, which has different players, different instrumentation and whatnot. Mix for the song and not the individual sound. But you can say, I really like the way this snare drum sits in this mix, and I want my snare drum to sit similarly in the mix. So use them again as guidelines and not trying to copy an individual sound. There are some people that they pull in the same kick samples or the same snare samples for every mix that they do, and that's a case of imprinting the style of the mixer on the song, and that might work for them, especially if they're working in a very narrow genre. I personally believe in putting the song first and mixing for the song, so not so much in terms of trying to copy a sound from one song to another, but to copy the feel, maybe the impact, to copy if it sounds as good. In other words, this snare sounds great in this mix. Does my snare sound as great in my mix? And if not, what are the elements in this reference mix that make it sound great? Is it the high end? Is it the reverb? Is it the compression? What can I do to make my snare impact as much as their snare? Can reference mixes get you into trouble? Absolutely. And the times I've gotten in trouble with reference mixes is when I've tried to force a mix down a particular pathway because the reference mix is down that pathway. So trying to force a snare sound to sound exactly like something else, trying to force a bass guitar, trying to force the overall tone too closely to what's going on in the reference mix. It doesn't really work to try to match stuff. You use reference mixes as guidelines and not as rules. Every time I've gotten into trouble, it's been because I've tried to force something that wasn't there. If you record at home or in a non-quote-unquote recording studio environment, your room, your monitors might fool you. If you don't have a completely, incredibly well-treated room, if you don't have the most expensive monitors and subwoofers, what you're hearing is not accurate as it could be. So what we want to do is put on reference mixes. If the reference mix, if we know it's a great sounding mix and it sounds muddy, well, that means our room is muddy. The best thing we can do, of course, is fix the room. But if you're like me, you don't have unlimited budget to throw at room treatment, or you might be mixing in a hotel room or a new place. So what we want to do is, in those cases, reset our perspective, listen to some reference mixes so that our ears get used to where the room is off a little bit or where our monitors are off a little bit. The human ears and brain are wonderful in terms of being able to adjust to an environment. So to a large extent, you're going to be able to hear what's wrong with your room and compensate for that over time. However, there's an exception to this, and that is that you can't hear what isn't there. So for most of us in our home studio environments, we're working with monitors that don't track very well in ultra low frequencies. And that's because ultra low frequencies, the low stuff, is the hardest stuff to get right, both in terms of your speakers and in terms of the room. So even though we can adjust to a certain extent with our ears and our brain, we can't adjust to what we can't hear. So there are certain cases in which I advise using a frequency analyzer. Now, some people will just say, use your ears. But again, we're not in a perfect environment in which we can use our ears. We're in an environment in which things are imperfect, and so a frequency analyzer will help us to spot those issues that we can't hear because of our limited budgets and our imperfect recording environments. So while your ears are, of course, the most valuable tool, your eyes can help as well. So this is how I do it in my sessions often. I'll have a mix going, and instead of a mix, I have a mix I did a couple of years ago here on track number 5, and I pull in a bunch of reference mixes. Right now I have a diverse range of music here: Audioslave Gasoline, Sheryl Crow, Good is Good, Jewel, Standing Still, and Sonny Came Home from Sean Colvin. And along with this mix that I did a couple of years ago called Breaking the Chains. And now what I'm looking for is just an overall sense of the tonality. So the first thing that I did is I took all of these tracks and I normalized them to the same level, because it's really super important that you're listening to stuff at the same level. The ear's frequency response changes as volume changes. So if you're listening at 2 different levels, you're not going to be hearing the same thing on the same track. So I just selected the top one, held down Shift, left clicked. On the bottom one, right click, Item Properties, Normalize. I set it to normalize to LUFS integrated to -12 and normalize each item separately. So what that's going to do is going to put all of these at the same relative volume, the same loudness to our ear. So now that we've got that accomplished, we can listen back to any of these, and it's going to be in the ballpark volume-wise. It's going to be very close. The first thing that I want to look for is overall tonal balance. And in order to do that, I'm going to listen to things, and I'm also going to use a frequency analyzer and do some comparisons here. So in order to do that, I'm going to look at the action list and run something called this load spectrum Lua. Now this pops in the frequency analyzer. It'll do it down here on an empty track. It's labeled spectrum, and it pops in as frequency analyzer and routes it so that it picks up multiple channels. So now I'm going to show you what this does. I'm going to play my mix, and let's take a look at where it runs on the frequency analyzer.
Breaking the chains.
Now that's pretty jumpy. The first thing I'll do is turn off the sum. I just want a single line here.
Breaking the chains.
Now let's set the integrate to up somewhere over a couple of seconds, because I'm not looking for instantaneous. I'm just looking for overall tonal balance. So we're up here over 2 seconds, so we should have a smoother curve.
Hey, yeah.
And I'm going to set the slope for about 3 dB per octave. Just, you can do this if you like. It gives you a more straight across line.
Hey, yeah. Bringing the change.
Now you can see there that dark green line is in fact my mix showing up on the spectrum. So here is the frequency response of all of my reference mixes going on all at once. And you can see there are some similarities. They're all basically in the same range. It looks like Audioslave here. Track 1 is a little hotter in the high end. Other than that, things are fairly consistent across all these songs. Now, these songs are from wildly different genres. We have soft folk rock with a female vocalist and hard, grungy rock from Audioslave with screaming and heavily distorted guitars. But the frequency responses are very similar. Once again, here in the low end, Audioslave seems to be the top contender here for the amount of bass. And depending on the part of the song, here we have Jewel tailing off on the high end, but that's only on certain parts of the song. Genre doesn't seem to be that important in terms of the frequency response. Where genre becomes more important is in individual kinds of sounds that are specific to a genre. For instance, certain kinds of metal might have a very clicky kick drum. Certain kinds of country might have a very twangy guitar solo. So when you're comparing individual instruments, you probably want to stay closer to your genre. But when you're comparing overall frequency spectrum, genre is probably not as important. As long as the instrumentation is fairly similar, drum sets, guitars, basses, keyboards, vocals, and whatnot. In order to avoid copyright claims, I'm going to turn the music off here, and we're just going to listen to me talk. Here we've got Sheryl Crow, Good is Good. She's in purple. It looks like the levels are pretty well matched. I'm up pretty hot at around, say, 50 hertz. She's got some high highs that are a little bit up from where mine are. Things look reasonably similar, but we start to diverge here. Well, it kind of depends on what part of the song we're at. Let's see what Audioslave does. Once again, up here, once we get up above 10K, they have a fair amount more. And once again, I'm a little bit hotter here in the low lows. But it's kind of in the ballpark of what's going on with Audioslave. Let's try Sunny Came Home here, which is an incredible song. Yeah, so once we pop into the chorus of Sunny Came Home, we have more high-end information here. And I'm a little bit hot in the low end. So what does this tell me, and what do I do about it? Well, what it tells me is that, according to several professionally recorded and mixed songs, I'm a little bit hot in maybe the 40 to 60 kilohertz range, and light in terms of upper harmonics here. Now, there are no notes that we're going to hear up in this range. It's all like the sizzle, the high harmonics. So I might experiment with a little saturation or harmonic distortion or something that will give me some upper harmonics in that area. Really, the question is, what do you do about something like this? Well, I could go back. I probably have a multi-band compressor on this mix. I could go back and just take those that 40 to 60 hertz or 60 hertz and lower down just a touch. And I might experiment with some of the higher end portions of the mix, maybe the cymbals, maybe some keyboards that have a lot of content up in the high end, and put some saturation on them to bring out some of those upper harmonics and fill in that high range. And I think it's really important to think about this in a certain way. You can easily break your mix. I don't want to try to match the frequency curve of all these songs. That kind of thing, it just really doesn't work. What you want to do instead, perhaps, is to take a look at several songs and see if your song is in the ballpark of all of these. Now, I could let that low end go because it's almost in the same area in terms of the low end as Audioslave Gasoline. I probably don't want to be doing more than that, so I might just take it down a little bit. And every single one of the other mixes had some more content in the 10K to 20K range, so that seems like something that I want to take care of. Now, you don't want to chase this unendingly because what you can end up doing is breaking your mix. So I would go back to the mix and I would be very careful about what I did. And I think probably the most important thing that you want to do is make sure your song feels good. Now, I'm not mixing in a perfectly treated room, so my room might fool me a little bit, and I'm not a young man anymore, so the high end in my hearing has declined compared to what a younger pair of ears might hear. So this is a case in which I might want to trust a frequency analyzer more than I trust my ears. Another thing you should think about in terms of your mixes is the dynamic range. Now, up here on the Master Effects, I have the JS loudness meter, but my favorite to use is the dynamic range meter, the TT dynamic range meter. And if you look at, let's say, Standing Still, on these outside meters, the outside meter is peak and the inside meter is RMS. But the dynamic range shows here, and you'll notice on most of our reference mixes, it stays somewhere here around 9, a little bit red, a little bit yellow, sometimes into the green, but mostly stays somewhere near the red-orange border. So if we go to an end chorus, for instance, where everything's cranked up, it's pretty tight in the red. Let's take a look at my mix. That's the guitar solo at the end. It was pretty tight there. Let's go to Audioslave. You can see by this waveform that it's pretty heavily compressed. Let's try Sunny Came Home. Now this is a quieter intro part. As you can see, I take a mandolin. And then when it cranks into the verse, the first verse, it tightens up just a little bit. If we go to the chorus, we're here around 7 or 8 in terms of dynamic range. And that's what we're looking for. If you're mixing down and you're going to master later, there's still an additional phase in which you can compress, you can limit, you can pull some of the peaks down to the dynamic range. So if you're not 100% in the range that you want to be here, that's okay. But where you want to be is somewhere close by. Now, some people say you really should be concerned about LUFS. You should be shooting for your LUFS target here. Now, first of all, I don't believe in LUFS targets so much. Yeah, sure, Spotify says that they're going to play back your mixes at -14, but that is not a target for you to shoot for. Most professional mixes, country, rock, pop, are going to pull maybe 8, 9, maybe 7, maybe 10 LUFS. But what we're looking for here is not to hit a LUFS target. We're looking to control dynamic range. As you can see, you know, this whole song, it says -12.9, but if we played the whole song, LUFS integrated, we would be at -12 almost exactly. And there's still headroom here. Let's see what happens if I go to Item Properties and normalize this to peak -1. Now you can see I've popped up and level a little bit. What happens if I play? So I'm going to be somewhere around 10 LUFS integrated throughout the course of the song. And that's a reasonable LUFS level for a song in this genre. Now if we look at some of these other mixes, and it's, you know, it's not good to judge a mix by looking at it, but we can see that Gasoline is highly limited. It's really just chopped off at the knees there on the peaks. Sheryl Crow, not as much, but in the choruses it's certainly fairly well limited. Jewel Standing Still, the same thing. Sonny Came Home, probably the least compressed of all of them, but you can still see it's fairly tightly limited in the louder parts of the song. So if we control these peaks, and that would probably be done by a limiter or a clipper in the mastering stage, then we can get our LUFs to be wherever we want them to be just by turning the mix up or down. The important thing is that we have some dynamics in the song. Look at the dynamics here. So first of all, there's the intro to the Audio Slave song, which is quite a bit different. Then there's this breakdown section. Same thing here with Jewel. Not quite so much with Sheryl Crow. Jewel also has a great intro. Sonny Came Home has an intro, a breakdown part. My song has a breakdown part, but it's not as dynamic as it could be. And it has an intro which is quite a bit different than the rest of the song. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for a variety of dynamics, but controlled. And we're looking to tame some of the peaks, perhaps with limiting and clipping. We're going to do that in the mastering phase. So if you're not completely on target in terms of your dynamic range, you still have a little bit to work with in the mastering phase. Another thing that we want to check against reference mixes is width. And width just means what it sounds like, how wide the song sounds, especially during things like choruses. In Reaper, there's a variety of ways to check width. I have the GS Gunyon meter set up here. We can check to see how wide the song is in a chorus. So this should be roughly oval shaped. Also have from Toucan a Gunyon meter. This one has a few more controls on it. We can change the scale. So let's compare this to Sonny Came Home. There's Sonny Came Home in a chorus. Here's mine. Sonny Came Home. My song. Looks reasonably in the ballpark. We also have M Stereoscope from Melda Productions, and I like this one best of all. Melda has a free FX bundle. Upgrades are available, as you can see down here, but I make do just with the Stereoscope free version. And what I like about it is it shows width here in this meter, which is just so easy to see. We also have the oval over here, which we can take a look at. If we go to Audio Slave here, here's a chorus. And you'll notice most of these pro mixes, they float in between 1/3 and 2/3 width, between 33 and 66%. Let's take a listen to Sheryl Crow. And in this particular part, it's up above 66%, but not much and not often. Once again, back to my song. Let's go back to a chorus. So I'm happy with this floating around between 33 and 66%. Now, what would I do if I were unhappy, if it was too narrow? Well, I would go back to the mix. I would look at panning. That would be my first guess. And really, width starts with arrangements. You got to have instruments planned so that some can go left and some can go right. I might pan things a little bit wider. I might pan a stereo delay a little bit wider on a vocal. I might do some mid-side processing and compress the sides and bring them up a little bit in level. That can help with width. Or I might go back as far as the arrangement and add some keyboards or some pads or some guitars or something expressly for the purpose of adding some width. I could go with some stereo reverbs perhaps instead of mono reverbs. Anything to create additional width if I find that the song is too narrow. Particularly in the choruses are whatever parts of the song are the biggest, widest sounding parts of the song. If you want to get better at home recording, or you're just starting off home recording and you want to get better fast, a mentorship is the way to do that. I've put together a program called the Home Recording Mentorship Program, and there's information below the video. Now, this takes a song from the initial idea, how to capture it, how to move to the DAW, set the tempo, create scratch drum tracks and guitars, basses, keyboards, finish everything up, including mixing, all the way through the finished song. And that's the Home Recording Mentorship Program, and it has a mentorship aspect to it as well. Check out the information below the video, and we'll see you there in the course. If you found this content valuable, it makes sense to subscribe. And also like, share, and comment. That helps me keep the channel going. That's it for now. I'm Keith from No Label, No Producer, NoLimits.com. I help home studio recordists make better recordings. See you soon. Bye-bye.